Hello, I'm Tony Rasmussen, and folks, can we both agree that kids nowadays seem to have it easier than people like us had it way back when? The reason I'm getting upon this subject is because today's subject is something that will far-fetch beyond the minds of kids nowadays. It's a little-known thing called syndication. So, what's syndication? I hear all of you kids ask. Well, kids, sit down and I'm going to tell you a story of syndication. Syndication originally was created in the 1970s as a way to re-release popular episodes of television shows, such as I Love Lucy, Gilligan's Island, The Brady Bunch, so on and so forth. Syndication really didn't take off until the 80s and 90s, surprisingly. Yeah, well, the 70s was kind of the precursor, again, with those sitcoms, as well as animated shows like the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Calvin and the Colonel. All those shows that kind of came out in the 60s and 50s. It was the 80s and 90s that pushed syndication. And syndication would end up becoming, in some ways, kind of huge. Now, in those days, you still had your classic shows. You still had your I Love Lucy's, your Honeymooners, your Taxis, your Mary Tyler Moore's, your Brady Bunch, all of your favorite shows. But along with that, they came up with new shows that they could run in syndication. And this was a little more prevalent in the mid-80s than it was, well, let's say way back in the late 70s. So you ended up with shows like Small Wonder. You ended up with new seasons of shows that went off the air years ago. Like, for example, shows like Fame or 21 Jump Street. But one that many people may not know is Fat Albert. Now, you see, folks, Fat Albert ran on CBS from 1972 to 1984. But when looking up on Wikipedia, there was one additional year. This year was done in syndication. This was done for all the networks to run in the afternoon. That syndicated season of Fat Albert was a hit and a miss. It was a hit for the networks because it gave them something to run at 3 o'clock. But it was a miss for all the fans, especially the longtime fans, who by that point, remember this was almost 13 years later, were showing their kids what they used to watch. And their kids probably will get a mixed intention based on it. And yes, they reran the older episodes, but that new season was kind of mixed. And most shows are like that, especially when they move into a new format. I mean, look at Futurama moving from Fox to Comedy Central. Imagine that kind of, well, oddity. As you know, we get past the 80s and 90s, there's a lot of popular shows going into syndication. You have shows like Home Improvement, Full House, Family Matters, The Simpsons. All of these shows that started in the mid to late 80s are starting to get into syndication in the early 90s. And the best example is The Simpsons. The Simpsons, as everyone knows, started in 1989. Technically in 87, but 1989. And it didn't get into syndication until about 1994. But there were some networks that were willing to already rerun the show back in 92, 93. So in some ways, The Simpsons was already in syndication within the show's first 3 seasons. That's insane. But, as the years would go on, there'd be more shows in syndication. You have shows like The Nanny, you'd have shows like Everybody Loves Raymond, King of Queens, Family Guy, Futurama, King of the Hill, Cleveland Show, American Dad, all of these shows. So I hear you all saying, Tony, what is the whole purpose of talking about syndication? Because you're talking to someone who, for a few years of his life, was practically raised on syndicated television shows. So, a little known fact about me. For a few years at my home, we had cable. And with cable, we were allowed to have all of the original channels that we were supposed to get through regular rabbit ear antennas. These channels would be, of course, our local CBS affiliate, WBKB Channel 11, shout out to them. This would also be 9 and 10 News, Fox 32, NBC 7 and 4, ABC 29 and 8. Mainly, though, I'm focusing on Fox 32 for this one, since that was where I watched most of my shows. Now, at this point in time, I hadn't really got fully introduced to The Simpsons yet. I kind of briefly known about them here and there, but it was because of The Simpsons and syndication that I got introduced to the show and ended up loving it. In fact, I remember the first episode I watched in syndication. I ran home from school way back in about 2007. Wow, that was years ago. And I remember it was like 3 o'clock, and I remember turning on the TV, and I thought to myself, I'm going to see what's on the other channels, because I used to watch PBS a lot. I used to watch the PBS shows during that period. Shows like Arthur, Cyber Chase, Maya Miguel, all those shows. Which some of them still hold up, by the way. I'm surprised Arthur lasted almost 20 fucking seasons. But I decided to flip it onto a different channel to see what was on the other channels at this time. And lo and behold, I came across The Simpsons. And what episode was it? It was the episode Behind the Laughter from season 11. As many of you know, this is my favorite season of The Simpsons. And I know that season 11 was kind of controversial because that was when the show was starting to really take a different form, but understand this. It was because of that episode that I got hooked onto watching the show every day at 3. And it was because of watching it every day at 3 that I eventually went out and bought the seasons, and I got the seasons as gifts, yada yada yada. So in some ways, syndication helped me find basically my favorite TV show of all time. As the years would go on, I would be introduced to more shows through syndication. I'd be introduced to shows like King of the Hill and Family Guy. I remember when I first watched Family Guy, the episode was I Take Thee Quagmire, from way back in season 4. I remember watching that. I remember watching Peter Guys around the time my little brother was born. We were sitting in the waiting room and we were watching Family Guy in syndication. We were also watching King of the Hill because at that point I missed The Simpsons. Yeah, the TV schedule for Fox 32 was kind of a little fucked up in a way. The original schedule from when I started really watching syndication up to a certain point was George Lopez would be on at 2:30, and then The Simpsons would be on at 3. King of the Hill would be on at 3:30. Family Guy would be on at 4. And then you'd have Everybody Hates Chris at 4:30, and then George Lopez at 5. That was the original schedule, and that was the schedule I loved the most because it was perfect. Right as I got home, The Simpsons would be on, and then I could watch King of the Hill right after, and then Family Guy right after that. That was the perfect schedule. And then a few months later, they changed the schedule up, and it was George Lopez at 3 o'clock, Simpsons on at 3:30 now, Family Guy on at 4. Actually, no, Everybody Hates Chris was on at 4, and Family Guy was on at 4:30, and King of the Hill was taken off the schedule. And was I upset? Kind of, but I think this was before I really got into King of the Hill, before I realized, it was a very good show. I just thought of it as, oh, this is, just kind of a perfect, in-between between, The Simpsons and Family Guy. And then a few months later, they changed the schedule again. It was George Lopez at 3, Everybody Hates Chris at 3:30, Family Guy at 4, George Lopez at 4:30. So by that point, The Simpsons was completely gone. And that was probably around the time I stopped watching. I think I probably watched Family Guy, but other than that, well, actually, Everybody Hates Chris and Family Guy, because Everybody Hates Chris is a very good show, by the way. But after that, I would just kind of stop watching. And I remember the last schedule I read was that it was George Lopez at 3 and 3:30, Everybody Hates Chris at 4, and then George Lopez at 4:30 and 5. George Lopez took over the afternoon schedule at one point. It was so fucking bizarre. I just remember thinking to myself, they must really want to rerun George Lopez. Either that or they're trying to get rid of it, but people keep demanding more. Now, I recently went back and looked over what the schedule was now, and now they got shows like Modern Family and Big Bang Theory and Mike and Molly, and I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I don't hate the Big Bang Theory, I find it okay. it's not my favorite show. I don't really hate it. It's just, to me, I would say the first 5 or 6 seasons of the show was good. I don't know what it was. I stopped watching after season 7. And, like, 6 and 7. I haven't really watched much since. But we used to watch it a lot in syndication on TBS. And, I thought some of the episodes were good. Some of them were okay. Was I laughing a lot? No. Was I chuckling, though? Yes. But, I never watched Modern Family. Modern Family was a show that I never really got into. And it's not that I hate the show. I think the actors in the show are very, very funny. Especially Ed O'Neill, who I know from Married with Children, which is one of my favorite Fox sitcoms other than The Simpsons. I thought he was good in it. And then, you got some of the other actors, and they do pretty well. Ty Burrell is very funny. But, yeah, Mike and Molly, I never really watched, but I did understand it was good. And did I find it good? What did I eventually watch it? I think I watched an episode, but I didn't really find it that good. I just found it okay. But Melissa McCarthy was pretty good in that show. I have to give her kudos. And so I haven't really watched much syndication recently, and it's mainly because I've been watching, DVD sets of the show. Been watching the other DVD sets. And it's easier for me, if I want to see an episode, bloop, it's right there. But I have to say that whole probably 3 year span between 07 and, no, actually no, it would have been 08 actually. 08 and probably 2010, so about 2 year span. That was some of the best stuff ever. I think that was the best, going, into watching syndicated shows ever. And it's kind of funny how, as I drifted far away, I ended up getting into other, kind of stuff through syndicated episodes of other shows. I love Bob's Burgers. I think Bob's Burgers is very funny. I love Archer. I think Archer is fucking hilarious. H. John Benjamin is perfect in both those shows. Yeah, syndication just kind of helped me find new shows. It'll help most people find new shows. If you don't know what syndication is, again, it's the rerun of old television shows or old episodes of current shows that they run on in the afternoons or late at night. I remember one other time, this is my last story, I remember one other time I was at my grandparents' house, and I remember seeing a commercial on Fox 32 for a rerun of South Park that was going to be on at 11:30 at night. And I thought to myself, if I was here till 11:30 at night, I would watch the rerun of South Park. And I believe it was the Thanksgiving episode, not the first one. It was the Helen Keller episode. That was the one. It was the Helen Keller musical episode. And I never got to see it, but I eventually did watch it reran on Comedy Central, and it was pretty good. So with all that said and all my rambling, syndication, it provided a lot of memories for me. And with all that said, this is Tony signing out. I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.